It looks like we need 1 more minute. There is a small glitch on YouTube, but we will go live in a second. Thanks, Ankit. Hello, good morning. We are live, but we are 1 minute to go. So please wait with us and we will start shortly. Thank you so much for joining and just give us 1 more minute to go. Hello, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. I believe it's already noon Eastern time, 11 a.m. Central. So it's time for our webinar to start. And thank you so much for joining us, wherever you are. Obviously, during the first COVID spike in the United States, and I would say between March and June, only 100,000 people were traveling versus the pre-pandemic rates of more than 2 million travelers a day, approximately. All of us, we want to see our industry back on its feet, and domestic travel, because of the summer season, it's already on the rise. There is no doubt that our summer travel plans has changed, and all over the world, things has changed. Airlines have updated their cancellation policies. Cruising is still on hold until September at the latest. Major hotel chains in the Americas are requiring guests to wear masks meanwhile in public spaces, and a surge of socially distancing experiences is coming up, like driving in movie theaters and other different experiences. The situation is constantly changing, and today I am honored to join such a great industry minds, industry leaders, colleagues, and friends. Together today, we will decode America's travel recovery. So thank you all so much for joining us today. Now, allow me to introduce you to our panelists, though I'm sure that they don't need an introduction because you all know them. But please join me in welcoming them. They are our amazing travel experts. And I will start with Katie Wolf, who is a true empowered woman. She continues to make the industry a better place, meanwhile driving Sojourn's commercial strategy for the Americas. Katie, I would love if you could share some words about yourself.
Sure. Thank you, Mercedes, and welcome everybody. Appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join this exciting webinar. Tons of great content. My name is Katie Wolf. I am the Vice President of the Americas at Sojourn. We are a data-driven travel company, and I look forward to sharing a lot of our insights with you in the upcoming slides.
Thank you so much, Katie. We also have Derek Price, who works as the Director for North America at Expedia Group. And he's been in the travel industry for more than 30 years, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm sure that, Derek, you've lived in more states than some people has visited. So Derek, would you like to share a few words?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mercedes, and thank you everyone for your time. As mentioned, I work for Expedia Group, more specifically the Media Solutions team. And I'm really excited to be here and share some of the insights that we see from an Expedia global perspective and what our shoppers are doing. So looking forward to hearing the content and sharing some insights with you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Derek. And also we have Wouter Gertz with us, who's definitely a reference in his field. He's a major analysis expert and he knows everything that is to know about data, trends, and projections. So Wouter, I'm hoping that I'm pronouncing your name now correctly.
Close enough. And I don't know if I know everything about data, but I appreciate the big up. But yeah, so I work for Skift Research in particular. We've recently launched a new product, so I'll be talking a little bit more about that and some of those findings later.
Thank you so much. And Chinmay Sharma, obviously I have the pleasure of working with him directly, and I must say that I am very fortunate because he can share his experience, his professionalism, and his commitment. Everyone knows how great he is. So thank you, Chinmay, for joining us, and especially for joining us during your vacation. That tells a little bit about your commitment.
Thank you, Mercedes. Yes, the feeling is mutual. Very happy to be here. Hello to everyone on the webinar. I'm the President Americas based out of our Dallas office. And yeah, looking forward to the webinar. Lots of interesting stuff. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And obviously, last but not least, my name is Mercedes Blanco, and I'm with BCB Social, a raging company. I also led the Americas for BCB, and I've been in the US since 2014. I'm super happy to be here with all of you. So that's our amazing panel of experts today, and here is our agenda for the day. But before we start, let me start a little bit about what we are going to do, some house rules. I will be the timekeeper, and I will introduce the next speaker. Remember that this session will be recorded, and it will be shared after the webinar, so will be this presentation, so no need to ask for the PPT. Each speaker will cover between 5 and 10 minutes of their topic, and there will be Q&A at the end. Of course, please post any questions. As you know, we are live on YouTube. You are also here with us on Zoom. We have the chat, so please don't be shy. Ask any questions. If appropriate, we will be addressing those directly. If not, we will make sure to save them towards the very end. If for some reason we are running out of time, I will make sure to address those questions to the right speaker so they can engage with you offline. And of course, remember, we are live, so let's keep this interactive. And without further ado, Katie, this is your area of expertise, so all yours.
All right, thank you. So we'll move to the next slide. I know all the presenters have a ton of great content, so I just wanted to share some common themes that Sojourn will go over. And some of the trends that we're seeing in our data. And I'll move rather quickly so we can save a lot of time for the Q&A. So on the next slide is some of the key insights that we're going to review. I think everybody's probably familiar or might not be familiar with some of these themes that we're seeing. We've seen some travel recovery. It started in early April, which is really exciting. A little bit of a drop off in July, which we'll talk about. You'll see some of these trends. Drive markets are dominating. Folks are feeling better in their car than they are on planes, but people are still flying. Hotels are leading the recovery charge. We'll talk about some of that data as well. We're seeing folks feeling safer traveling in country, so domestic and intra-travel. And then we're seeing optimism about some of our favorite destinations coming up later in Q3 and Q4, so we'll talk about that. You also can find out, Sojourn has a ton of great real-time data and insights on our website, so you can find that information there if you want to go 24/7. And we also have a great travel blog as well if you want to follow that. All right, so a couple of the trends when we look at searches and some of the things that have happened since the beginning of the year. Certainly don't like the trough that we saw in March, but love to see some of the peaks and a little valley coming up, but maybe we'll go back to some peaks. But hotel search and flight search, you can see some of those trends. And on the next slide, if we dive a little bit deeper and you look at more of a closer view of since the recovery started in April, hotel search is more confident. You can see different regions are performing a little bit stronger in the search piece. You see Europe and the Americas in particular. And on flight searches as well, we've seen good recovery since the beginning of April, with some drop-offs here recently with some of the current outbreaks, COVID outbreaks, mostly in the US in particular. Diving deeper on the next slide, if we look at, so we were looking at searches before on the previous slides. This is about hotel bookings. So hotel bookings are leading the charge over flight bookings. So consumers, again, feeling a little bit more confident. Perhaps they can hop in their car, book a hotel and get a stay in. And so you're seeing really nice pickup in Europe in particular since the beginning of June. I know that they did a great job getting COVID under control over there, which is great. But nice trends really from every region around the globe on the hotel side. On the flight side, a little, not as strong of a pickup. Again, seeing Europe trending a little bit higher, had the US flight bookings doing well with some fall off again in late June and July. And then when we look at recovery and we look at it around the world and by different markets, probably no surprise that we're seeing domestic travel, people more confident with domestic travel versus international travel. I think that's going to take a while to come back. We're going to see a little bit more data in some of the upcoming slides on that. But domestic and in-country, and then intra-regional in particular. So I think, again, some Europe trends on the hotel side, people feeling confident maybe crossing intra-Europe. And on the flight search, again, domestically seeing pickup there as well. But international, I think, unfortunately, with some of the border closings and until things get a little bit under control, is going to be a little later to recover in the market. And when we drill down to look at the US and some of the US markets, folks wanted to see where people are flying and you know, where folks are going. This is just looking at the top 10 US metro domestic markets. So again, since March and April, slight uptick with a little fall off later. So you can look at some of those top 10 markets. You see Atlanta in there and Chicago, Dallas, Denver. Some pickup was happening in Las Vegas, which was exciting when that market reopened. And you can see that kind of going down the line there. But the real story is on the drive market. So I think what's been really interesting is this is a slice of luxury data and luxury hotel data. So some pent up demand, I think, in certainly some of the metro markets with folks who maybe their summer travel plans got canceled and they want to get out of town. And so this is just looking at data within 500 miles of some of the key markets on the East Coast and the West Coast. And you can really see a dramatic increase from Q1 in January and February to Q2, you know, May through July, and July in particular, really heavy pickup in the bookings and the drive market bookings in particular. If you look at year over year, quite substantially different. So outside of the big cities in the Northeast and on the West Coast, Napa and Sonoma enjoying some nice luxury travelers driving into their markets as well. And then when we look at the short haul flight data, I think what was really interesting, if you know you looked at this, and obviously in Q1 versus even May or June, we saw in May when recovery started to happen, folks were feeling a little bit more confident of, you know what, I'm ready to get on a flight perhaps, but I just want it to be a single flight. I want it to be short haul nonstop. We saw some interest in some, I would say, open air markets, places like Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, Utah, where folks wanted to get out. And so we saw some great pickup in short haul flight markets. But then we saw with the change in COVID and what's happening in the US in particular, folks started to lose a little bit of that confidence. You saw that shift over to the drive markets. And essentially the short haul markets have seen a decrease in June and July, which is unfortunate, but it's nice to see hotels still picking up some business with that drive market data. And then, you know, this is just the last slide I'll close out with. I'll say, you know, us travelers are optimistic people. I know during this pandemic, I'm going to say I've probably been on eight or 10 flights within the US. I've traveled to Montana, New York, North Carolina, South Carolina, Delaware. And I want to support the industry and I want to get out there. And I know there's a lot of other people, there's pent up demand, and we're optimistic that markets are going to open. And so what this is just showing you is that people are thinking, gosh, I can't wait to get to the Caribbean. I want to get back to Hawaii. I want to go to Mexico. I'm dying to get back to Las Vegas and see some shows and do some gambling. So we're seeing optimistic travelers doing some bookings, but further out in hopes of things getting under control. And that's what we need. We need some optimism in the industry. We need some safety, and we're going to talk about some of those pieces as well. And just excited to see things recover hopefully soon. So with that, I will close out Sojourn's piece and look forward to the additional data from my colleagues.
Thank you so much, Katie. And I love that you were ending with Honolulu and Hawaii, because that's one of my favorite destinations. So you are definitely leaving us with a great taste. So Derek, that's all yours now.
Excellent, thank you. And I appreciate the data that Katie was just able to share. A little of my history, I spent some time at Sojourn, so they've got an amazing data set and can really help formulate a great story for recovery. An OTA perspective, specifically Expedia Group, is able to do the same, but provide a bit different from a search and book perspective. You want to go to the next slide. one of the nice things of being a global OTA is we have access to our consumers in real time, and we're able to actually do some sentiment study. And real quickly, it gives me great heart to see our customers still want to travel. They are interested in booking. They are actively shopping. It's something that we see every single day. The drop in shop searchers in March was definitely devastating to our entire industry. And then a bit of a dip again in late June due to the increase in COVID cases certainly did not help. But our consumers are still shopping. They are still booking. So there is light at the end of the tunnel. The tunnel just happens to be a bit longer right now. So if you want to go to the next slide, we are seeing very different behaviors than we have traditionally seen in our shoppers. So this is a snapshot of consumer behavior. And what we're seeing in the OTA space specifically is a much shorter booking window. So you'll notice in orange, that is the percent of searches for this year versus, and then gray is last year. So you're seeing a dramatic growth in those short term, really that 3-week window. People are looking to book and go right now. As Katie said, we're seeing the same behavior, that drive market, something close to home. Drive market may be changing. So instead of a 3-hour drive, we're seeing people willing to go 4, 5, 6 hours. So we're seeing some changes, but we're seeing growth in those searches. So I'm excited to see that. And if we want to go to the next slide, something else that's really unique within our group is Vrbo. So many of you may have heard of HomeAway. Vrbo is a leading vacation rental platform that we acquired a few years ago and have adjusted into the Media Solutions platform. It is where we are seeing dramatic growth. And actually our strongest signs of recovery are in that vacation rental market. And if you want to go next slide, Mercedes, you'll see that what we're finding, and we kind of knew this, but now that it's part of our world, the amount of accommodations that are in a marketplace now are much larger. And I know for many hotels that are on the call, this is not what you want to hear, but it is such an important piece of re-energizing the market and bringing that revenue and the economic impact that travelers have back into the marketplace, because these people are still eating at restaurants, they're still booking attractions, and they're still shopping in retail shops. So it's very, very important to the marketplace. And if we go to the next slide, we'll see why. The average spend for customer is dramatic within a vacation rental product. And we're talking hundreds of dollars in difference. And this definitely will help. And our team at Vrbo is working with local governments to make sure taxes are being managed correctly. So revenues are being reported back to the counties. And those DMOs that are funded by room tax are benefiting from this business. And if you want to go to the next slide. Average length of stay, again, 2.5 nights with a standalone hotel package, nothing to sneeze at. But when somebody's spending almost a full week, that's many more restaurants, that's more money in the marketplace. So definitely we're seeing strong growth, and this is definitely helping marketplaces come back. And if we go to the next slide, we're going to start taking a look at what we're seeing from Expedia Group from a global perspective. And these are searches around the world in what we call a super region. So really focusing on the America super region, that thick gray line. We're seeing the behavior of searches, and we definitely all experienced that dip on June 29th. It was another dark day, but we are seeing dramatic growth in our searches every single day since then, which is really encouraging. And I live in Florida, the new epicenter of the world, and the consumers are still shopping. They are still looking to travel. And as Katie said, this pent-up demand is only going to continue to grow. And if we want to go to the next slide, this just reiterates where we are seeing the strongest growth, and that is in that 0 to 21 day booking window. So I think Katie's slide talked about that advanced purchase window for flights searching farther out, hotel bookings and DMO type business. So those consumers that are looking for accommodations, that really is that short-term window. What can I do now or in the next 3 weeks to get out, get a change of scenery. And I think that's really important for us when we start looking at recovery. Hotels need business now, but they also need business later on. And I think all of us can help secure that. Going to the next slide. It is a bit of a different story, and Katie definitely mentioned this, domestic for international. We know domestic is key. We are looking at hyper local focus initiatives. Many DMOs are looking at sort of that in-county traveler and then branching out in conceptual circles. So really branching out and then hitting that in-state, then hitting that drive market. It is something that we are anticipating seeing for definitely the near future. And if we take a look at the next slide, we'll see a global snapshot of consumer sentiment about traveling internationally and domestically. And look at that, 93% of the consumers that are coming to our sites in searching are looking for domestic travelers in the US. You see a similar kind of number over in Japan and APAC. Mexico travelers definitely feel a little bit more comfortable traveling out of their country. But again, a good portion, they want to stay close. They want to stay local. And I think that's where we're going to find our recovery. And I think I went pretty short. I think that ends my slide. If we want to take the next snapshot, this just is a quick update on what we're doing within our global recovery program. All of us on this phone call can help you, give you data to help you create the best strategy for recovery. So thank you again for your time. I welcome any question that you have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Derek. You were definitely on time. I appreciate you and Katie for making it very short, and I'm sure that our audience will appreciate as well. I am not seeing any questions from our audience, so please, if you do not hesitate. Just post any questions you may have. We will make sure to cover those. And now that leads me into our next speaker. Wouter, all yours.
Thank you, Mercedes. So I'm gonna hold my microphone by my mouth because I hear it's not working very well. So, yeah, I'm just going to talk a little bit about Skift research and a product that we recently launched, which is called the Skift Recovery Index. So in the actual index, we cover 22 different countries, which easily covers about 3/4 of global GDP. And over 60% of global inbound and outbound expenditure. And we work with 16 different data partners. Sojourn is one of them, RateGain is one of them. Maybe later on, Derek and I can have a chat about maybe Expedia joining as well. So we have, our data partners provide us with weekly updates on what they're seeing in the market. And then we compare what's happening now with the same time last year. Because we track about 40 different indicators per country, we can really slice and dice the data in different ways. And it does mean that we take a more holistic view of the market. We look at searches, we look at bookings, we look at web traffic, we look at actual occupancy and load factor capacity and things like that. So we have a very holistic view of what's happening in the market. So if we go to the next slide, there's so this is just a very much a bird's eye view of what's happening in the industry at the moment. This is the global average score, and as you can see, it's currently standing at 40, which means that current performance is at around 40% of what it was at the same time last year. And so once again, this is a quite a holistic view. It's not just revenues, it's focusing on a lot of different types of indicators. As you can see, it's a lot higher than what it was in early April when it was around 16%, but there's still quite a long way to go. So if we go to the next slide, I just want to focus a little bit more on the US. And what we're seeing here is, well, as you can see, the overall trend for all these countries, and I've put some context with some other major tourism economies. What you can see is the overall trend is indeed up. But as you can see as well, the US has been stagnating a little bit. Recovery is stalling, as some of the previous speakers talked about as well. But I think once again, what's pretty clear here as well is that we see a lot of countries have these types of fluctuations. So this is not going to be an easy straight line recovery. That's already clear now. So moving on, I just want to focus a little bit more on the US and a bit more in depth. So we can slice and dice the data by vertical. So we can, here I've done that, and you right away you can see that 3 of these lines go down very far, and one, the macroeconomics line, doesn't go as far. I mean, this makes sense. The macroeconomics bucket, if you like, or vertical, tracks economic data. So labor, consumer confidence, the stock market, things like that. The overall US economy just hasn't decreased as much as the travel industry, which I don't think is a surprise to anyone here. The industry is very hard hit. What you can see though is that drive, as Katie already mentioned as well, picked up pretty rapidly. But in the last couple of weeks, we have seen a few fluctuations there and some declines. Actually, lodging, which again was mentioned before as well, has seen some of the best performance and almost straight line performance over the last couple of months. And flight, as you can see here, it's really, really tough for the flight sector at the moment. And if we go to the next slide, there's a little bit more in-depth information here. Last week, actually, we saw some Q2 earning calls happening from some of the major US airlines. And it was pretty much bad news after bad news after bad news. Demand is not as strong as expected. And actually, we can see that very, very clearly here. I just had a look at some COVID data, and from the 19th of June in the US, new daily cases of COVID went above 30,000, and since then it's risen obviously dramatically in the US. It wasn't above 30,000 since the beginning of May. So you can see right away here that searches for flights and bookings for flights by US residents declined from basically the 19th of June. Seat capacity did increase, but that's more to do with it's scheduled, it's longer ahead of time. So clearly there were expectations that demand would continue to increase, but sadly for the airlines, it seems that wasn't the case, and that's why we've seen such bad performance. Finally, the last slide, I just want to talk a little bit about lodging as well. As mentioned before by Derek as well, we are seeing the same, where hotel bookings versus vacation rental bookings. Vacation rentals are by far outperforming hotels since that major trough or the lowest point in early April. But again, I think we should be a bit more nuanced here. Now, the way we can do that is we have 2 data providers that provide us with vacation rental data in the index. So I've just put that on the right of your screen here. I mean, you can see the one is Transparent, which is a data provider which scrapes all these different websites for information about vacation rentals. So they have almost a total view. I think they track around 3 million properties in the US, a total view of the market. Whereas Key Data Dashboard is a provider that works particularly with more traditional property managers. So these tend to be in the more traditional vacation rental destinations rather than the urban, more Airbnb-like destination. And as you can see here, the traditional vacation rentals have been outperforming, or have outperformed the total market quite drastically, and then actually saw some really strong growth, 150% compared to last year. So actually much better than last year. But that's also now starting to decline again, probably because of what's happening and what I've mentioned before. So I'm going to leave it there. Obviously, we've got a lot more insights, but you can reach out to me via LinkedIn, or we can obviously answer some questions afterwards as well. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much. That was a great presentation. And before jumping into the next speaker, Just allow me to say that we have had some great questions addressed through our speakers, and at the end of the presentation, I will spend a few minutes answering all of those and giving all of the speakers the opportunity to explain their answers a little bit more in detail. So just so you know. So Chinmay, it's your turn to sign.
Thank you, Mercedes. Great, we can jump into the first slide. We'll start with a little bit of data on what we're seeing through the rate gain system. We are fortunate that we see, millions of transactions on a monthly basis in real time, pretty much across the world. But today we're talking more about the US. So the interesting thing is that we saw almost like a Nike swoosh around April and early May. And I think for all the people on the webinar who did their financial reforecast around that time, I feel a little sorry for you because the trend seems to be flattening a little bit. I think it's also a function of what's happening within the states, of America. So North America, definitely not out of the woods. Like we see in the chart, good movement in the 8 weeks preceding 4th of July weekend. But now I think the rising cases and probably politics continue to be an issue. Currently, 17 states and localities have travel restrictions within the US or have some guidance in place, including, high demand markets like the tri-state areas, the Hawaii and the Alaskas. So good thing is that I know there was a question around cancellation rates. So the good thing is that the cancellation rates are flattening. So the net reservation trends are still healthy and looks like these are real bookings. Obviously, the suppliers flexing the cancellation policies does have a impact. But at the same time, the rates are still under pressure. I mean, in general, the average rates across the US, also Canada, are down by about 30 to 40% on average. But what we've seen is, I think the point that Wouter and Derek had made resonated with us as well on vacation rental and alternate lodging. We've seen some increased activity there, and also some last minute business models that are incremental, especially with partners like Hotwire and Hotel Tonight. They're seeing a lot of good traction, very last minute business, short length of stay. But I think people are very willing to travel within a few hundred miles of their residence. So I think that's pretty encouraging. So Mercedes, if you go to the next slide. So we do track hotel closures as well. And this is from our some data from our partner, TripPan, which specializes in corporate travel. And these are shop dates just as of yesterday for a few future dates. And it's interesting to see that California and New York, in terms of the states, are the biggest ones in terms of hotel closures. Still about 1,500 hotels in the US are closed. And specifically the cities of San Francisco and Manhattan are leading the closures. That obviously has an impact on travel. And it's also a function of costs and profitability as well. I think we've been speaking to a lot of hoteliers and ownership groups and REITs. And I mean, like we said, a lot of hotel companies are still not profitable, so it has a direct impact on when do you open. There is additional cost of running operations now post-COVID, so all those factors are playing a role. The US occupancy in Q2 calendar, according to STR, was about 34%, but the rates, like we said, were pretty down, and the RevPAR was down around 70%. So even though in June the occupancy on aggregate was about 42%. But the break-even occupancy for a lot of these hotels is in the region of 45 to 50, which obviously, makes life a lot more difficult. So Mercedes, if you go to the next slide. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time here on the new normal in guest acquisition. So we do a lot of work with a lot of companies, not only in revenue management distribution, but also marketing and some strategic consulting. Customer acquisition was never easy, and it's no different now. The interesting part is that most travel and retail brands are seeing a disproportionate increase in online activity and sales, which is, I mean, interesting and obviously expected as well, because in-person activities are limited. So while the consumers might still be a bit distracted, I think I read somewhere that our attention span is less than that of a goldfish, so that doesn't help, especially in the current scenario. But the customers do find it reassuring to hear from brands that they're familiar with during these lockdown periods. And one thing is very clear, that consumers are spending more time online, and they're also open to new digital experiences. Like most of us are working from home, and I think we would have never thought that it could actually become successful. Now that's going to have an impact on real estate spaces and the like. So similarly, I think a lot of business models will continue to evolve. Health and safety, according to a lot of research, is the number one thing which is bothering the customers right now from a travel intent perspective. The travel suppliers are actually doing a pretty good job of adapting their operations to focus on health and safety, and be it airlines or be it hotels, etc. But at the same time, most of them are actually doing a pretty terrible job of communicating by updating the content and using social media. So I personally have seen, this week I'm on vacation, like Mercedes mentioned, and I was planning a road trip, and so many hotels have the same content as before on their websites. Nothing has changed. And the ones that will convert better are the ones who actually adapt to the new normal. They talk about what has changed, and they want to give that confidence on health and safety to the customer. And they're also the ones who are using social media handles to just communicate and give that confidence back. So I think that's a pretty big factor that'll probably differentiate one player from the other ones in a pretty competitive marketplace. On the question of marketing budgets, big focus on cost and profitability in the current environment, especially when we speak to ownership groups. And in the hotel world, a lot of REITs actually have ownership stake in hotels and management companies. And it's very clear that any investment, and especially in marketing, has to be very trackable, and the results have to be pretty immediate. If you put together like a 5-year plan to say, hey, you invest now and you'll reap the benefit over a couple of years, that's not going to fly. It has to be pretty much immediate. And I think STR publishes some profitability numbers, and currently, at least for limited service properties, they're breaking even at about 45% occupancy. And for full service properties, they'll break even at about 50%. So that's also a factor in terms of hotel closures, as well as an impact on marketing spend, etc. I think one of the questions I saw in Q&A was any particular segment of hotels that are doing well. So at least in our data, we've seen that economy brands and extended stay brands are continuing to do well. Wyndham, Choice, Extended Stay America, In-Town, Uptown Suites. I think these brands in particular are doing very well. They also have good locations, which are not concentrated in big markets, and that also helps, especially in today's travel market, where drive market is going to be big. Brands that haven't invested in digital are clearly struggling, and those that have made the right strategic moves in the past are in the best position to compete because they have the infrastructure and the expertise. The good thing is that online traffic is up. According to the data that we see, CPC is down because less number of advertisers, which is good. The conversion is slightly down because it's a function of also higher search, but not as much. And the ROI is clearly up. So I think we've seen at least some partners actually recovering a little bit faster because they're bucking the trend by investing in the right places. Like I said, the tracking, the marketing spend is going to be critical. The ROI is more critical than ever before. And the recommendation from us to the audience is that decide what data is relevant, and then create goals, and then watch the trends and report and communicate. So the good thing is, in closing, that even though the current crisis is challenging, it's also an opportunity to rebuild the engagement with customers. In a world where traditional and in-person channels are significantly curtailed. And it's very critical to widen your top of the marketing funnel by creating awareness and interest. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to my talented colleague, Mercedes, who will give you some more insights on this fascinating topic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chinmay. And before jumping into the last part of the presentation, I'm talking a little bit more about upper funnel and lower funnel through social media. Just allow me to remind you that all of your questions will be answered at the end. I'm the last one, so just in 5 to 10 minutes, we will cover all of those questions that you've been asking through Zoom, YouTube, and so on. So talking a little bit about social media, for those who joined my first webinar back in May, I was providing you with some data about what is it that BCB, a social media provider for the hospitality industry, was seeing. We have obviously seen that change since, and we have decreased the number of clients or properties asking to pause their services because they do understand the importance of communicating to their audience. We are seeing roughly 1 out of 4 properties asking to be back at full capacity through marketing and social media. And this data can be a little bit tricky because obviously we still have a lot of properties that are still closed and that are not open for business yet. So obviously we are seeing a lot of properties scaling back and talking about what is it that they, or when is it that they are going to open. Giving you a little bit of data, with more than half of the world's total population using social media, which is actually 75% of the total population in North America, now it's perfect time to rethink how we are going to use those powerful platforms. Let's face it, Facebook is still powerful, even you want it or not. In particularly, I would recommend thinking about social media as a layer to run through what people is doing, right? Both online and offline, rather than being a series of distinct destinations and standalone services. We have seen that a lot of people is turning into social media for asking questions and to follow the trend of my colleagues and everything that Katie, Derek, Walter, and Chinmay have shared. We have seen an increase on social media communications. If you look at the data, February still we were operating under normal numbers, and that's total messages handled through social media. And obviously we saw a big drop on March, followed by April, but we are seeing a recovery. So we are seeing how people is really looking to communicate to their partners, their hotels, and asking questions because they want to know what is going to happen, right? We have seen a 5% increase in guests asking about Facebook about F&B or only reopenings, right? When is it that your restaurant is going to open? And we saw all of those questions mainly through May and June. Let's face it, we were all getting tired of cooking at home, right? Meanwhile, we have seen 164% increase in guests asking about mask requirements and safety measures. In this chart here, you can see what were the total questions asked and what is the difference between cancellations, opening dates, and mask or safety measures and restrictions. To me, this chart is very interesting because as you can see in March, the main question was about cancellations, but right now the biggest questions are about reopening and safety measures, and that tells a lot. I believe that people is just booking flexible rates because of the freedom, not because they do not intend to travel, although we are seeing that shortening in time, right? This is the last presentation, and in contrast to the jump into the ad engagement that we reported back in April, the latest data suggests that Facebook users click on fewer ads in June than they did in March. That can be because people is getting tired of advertising, they want real communications, or because they are starting to just communicate differently. The company's advertising tool reports that the global remains steady, but if we take a closer look into the data by age and by gender, the data reveals that clicks actually decline across most demographic groups. And that's compared again between June and March. Facebook advertising engagement levels are still very high. Obviously, that's the standard that we see through our social media strategy. And another important thing is that for luxury clients, we are seeing a higher return on the advertisement spend. We are seeing over plus 5 times more than when we were seeing in June. So I know that we were seeing some questions about different markets like service, luxury. Obviously, we are seeing a lot of ROI in those luxury hotels, and that's also because well, trends tell us that trust it's most likely to be higher through those luxury segments. Okay, so that's the end of the presentation. Thank you so much to all of our speakers. I will actually allow you to turn your cameras on because it is time for all of us to answer our audience questions. So if you don't mind, let's turn your videos and your mics on. I believe that some of you already answered some of the questions, but allow me to walk you through those. The first question was asked by Kimberly. Kimberly Kilburn was asking about going back to hotel search subject. Is there a sense of how searching hotels with intention of canceling upcoming bookings is impacting the overall search numbers? Could the numbers be therefore inflated beyond the actual intention of searching and creating a new booking? And Chinmay answered that question. Also, Katie was happy to provide some feedback. So Chinmay, if you can answer, and then Katie, if you can provide some additional information, that would be great.
Yeah, I think my point was pretty quick that some suppliers flexing the cancellation policy is definitely having an impact. But we track the cancellation policies, I mean, the cancellations pretty much in real time across major hotel chains. And we saw that at the onset of COVID, obviously there were heavy cancellations and they were outpacing new bookings. But since then, the cancellation rates have become much more normal compared to historic trends. So net, I think the bookings that are happening now are still going to be stable. I think the concern in the suppliers is that, is this real business on books or will it vanish? So our gut feel is that it should stay. But over to Katie.
Yeah, I would say at Sojourn, we're seeing similar trends. So Sojourn has for hoteliers a model called pay on the stay, which is a commission model. So customers don't pay until the customer stays. So we did see a high level of cancellation certainly at the onset, and March, April, May. But like Chinmay said, we've seen that level out in particular because our customers have the ability to go into our portal and reconcile their bookings based on customer stay. So we've seen that decrease significantly, which is great. And we've also seen a lot of in the month, for the month travel as well. So I believe Derek talked about like the shorter booking window and, inside of 21 days. So we're seeing folks book and actually going and staying, which is exciting, and not canceling inside of that window. So optimistic about the trends we're seeing there.
Thank you both. Derek, I believe next question goes to you. Frank Marasco was asking about terms of recovery for hotels. If we have seen any particular surge or dip in any particular segment of hotel.
Well, and my apologies, Mercedes, I just sent you a message. I actually entered the answer to the cancellation in the wrong question, but I can answer the question high level. We are not seeing any particular surge in one market segment of hotel versus another. I think where we are seeing surges is with those hotels that are talking about their flexible cancellation or their flexible booking policies. We are seeing a stronger conversion in those hotels that are speaking about that versus those that don't.
Katie, do you want to add anything else?
Yeah, I think, in our data, what we're seeing is similar to what Chinmay said, a lot of the economy and extended stay brands. So we're seeing Best Western is having great pickup, Choice, Extended Stay America, those longer stays, also vacation rentals as well. And then to some of the data points that I showed in my slides as well, we're seeing pent up demand for travelers. So people who might have had a summer vacation planned if they were going to Europe or somewhere else and they couldn't make it, have then maybe reallocated those dollars to a nicer vacation and are upgrading to some of the luxury segments and are willing to pay more for an experience that they can drive to.
Thank you so much. And next question is coming from Ross Stevenson. I see a couple more from Ross. So Ross, thank you for keeping us active. So Ross, you were asking about what is that we believe it will happen post stimulus packages with all of the people on furlough and so on. And I believe that you were addressing that question when we were talking about the SCIF research. And I know that Wouter has shared something on his post, but if Wouter, you could share a little bit more with the rest of the audience, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's an interesting question whether stimulus packages or either for the travel industry or furlough packages for employees has had any impact on how travel is impacted or how it's now recovering. To be fair, I don't really have the answer. The only thing I can look at the moment is like I said, we track 22 different countries. Each country has its own way of dealing with this, its own stimulus package, its own furlough arrangements. Saying that, pretty much every country is tracking the same way. Every country has gone down. China was obviously ahead of everyone else, but every country has gone down to that very low level early April and is now starting to slowly climb up. And yes, there are fluctuations, and I think at the moment, really what we're seeing is that as soon as COVID cases increase, or as soon as border restrictions are lifted, or restrictions are put in place again, that's when it's having an impact on the travel industry. I think I mentioned to Ross one question that I find interesting, and when it comes to putting people on furlough, obviously from a hotel perspective, we know that a lot of hotels have closed and are probably reopening now. I think one of the questions that we should ask is whether vacation rentals might have benefited from the fact that hotels were closed and probably have a bigger barrier to reopening than vacation rentals do, especially with their employees on furlough, maybe needing restaffing or retraining once they reopen. So that's an interesting question to me in terms of furlough. But otherwise, I don't really at the moment see how this is impacting travel. We can look back at previous crises and look at 9/11 or SARS or whatever and see that stimulus packages did have a positive impact on the travel industry, but for now, I think we're still so deep into this that it's quite hard to say how this will play out in the future.
Yeah, and not only rentals. I think that I've never seen so many RVs on the road in my life. I think that those are the main beneficiary of what is happening.
Exactly.
Chinmay, Ross was also asking about hyper adoption. If you could explain a little bit more about what you meant about hyper adoption.
Yeah, sure. So my point on hyper adoption was just about consumer behavior changing rapidly, especially given the current environment. So the consumer behavior typically is relatively steady, but during these times, the changes are rapid as well as unprecedented. So as an example, what we were discussing, these flexing of these cancellation policies is just resulting in folks booking vacation packages sometimes into next year as they expect things to normalize. And to be honest, everybody is waiting to get out. We were in touch with American Airline vacation team here in Dallas about a couple of weeks ago, and they had an interesting stat to share that their volume of bookings was nearly the same as same time last year, which is really interesting. So these things will probably just impact on the way the customers change their behavior. But at the same time, like we were saying, the most important part is trusted brands will always win because the customers love to hear from them. One more example is Amazon is a perfect example. I'm buying on Amazon like crazy, and they've flexed their return policies. So even retailers like Amazon are getting a boost in their sales, and also product trials, etc. People are willing to trial more stuff since things are a little bit more flexible. So that was my point about hyper adoption.
And I think, Chinmay, that's also answering next question. And Katie, you also answer Beth's question a little bit earlier. She was asking about how travel suppliers could potentially mitigate the risks of revenue fluctuations. I believe that we have answered that, but I don't know if any of you could want to share something else or answer anything else to Beth. I believe that that was answered, Beth. If not, feel free to ask any other question. Okay, wonderful. So we have also Dino. He was addressing his question to Chinmay and asked about targeted marketing. I can definitely also answer that as well. He was asking about, or he was hesitant about how worthwhile would be to invest in targeted marketing given the weakness of the market. And he was saying that it was hard to believe that there were any ROI. I can assure you, Dino, and I am happy to connect with you offline and share any case studies on how we've been able to provide real revenue to our partners through targeted marketing. If something is going to help you right now, it's hyper marketing, and especially through your local audience as well. But Chinmay, if you want to answer to Dino with targeted marketing.
Yeah, no, I think your answer is perfect. The only thing I would add is that that top of the funnel becomes equally more important now, so that awareness and interest is critical. And just opening the hotel and expecting folks to arrive might not actually happen. So you'll have to engage a little bit more, and just doing it in a strategic way and measuring it in the right way and with partners, not only like ourselves, with anyone. I think that probably will be the strategy that will differentiate some folks more than the other ones.
Thank you, Chinmay. And I believe that any of us could answer Miguel's questions below. He is asking for those touristic destinations that resume activity in the past few weeks, if there is any evidence that the pandemic revived. I believe that obviously there is no direct relation of tourism increasing COVID. I think that it's about human interaction, not just the tourists. If the locals are just ignoring the government recommendations and are getting together, I think that has higher risks for COVID. But I don't know if any of you wants to share anything else about Miguel's question.
I think it's I think that question from Miguel, and there's another question from John as well about market reaction to COVID-19 protocols, and he might be talking about more the hotel side of things or airlines. But I think it's quite interesting to look. I'm based in London here in Europe, and here we're seeing only in the last couple of days a spike in cases in Spain, for example. They had a massive lockdown, and now certain areas in Spain are, and it's only a very few areas, but a few areas in Spain are seeing increased cases again, and including Barcelona. And different governments are responding differently to how they deal with that. And so the UK government, for example, closed down or told their residents that they shouldn't fly to Spain anymore, or if they do, they have to quarantine for 14 days when they come back. And it's interesting to see the response from the travel industry and how that is different between different players. So TUI, a major tour operator here, canceled all flights to Spain right away. Another tour operator, Jet2 Holidays, continued to fly even though people won't be insured now they're traveling to Spain because it's against government advice. So it's very interesting to see how travel companies now that sort of restrictions have sort of started to be lifted, and people might have in some way thought that things were going to be better and better now, and maybe that's not everywhere the case, as we've also seen in the US. It's really interesting to see how different companies now are starting to respond to if demand goes down again, or if restrictions are being put up again. So that probably doesn't answer either of those questions directly, but I do think it's an interesting point.
And if I may, have been originally from Spain, I think that we have to be very, very careful when we or our governments are communicating or releasing new measures of prevention, because for instance, in the Canary Islands, they have 0 cases of COVID-19, and they are suffering the consequences of the UK government just saying the EU mass quarantine coming from Spain. I get that if you're coming from Barcelona, but if you're coming from the Canary Islands, poor friends of mine, they have no cases there, and they are going to suffer the consequences through the rest of the season. So I think that all of us as professionals, we have to be very careful when we are supporting and when we are talking about what is it that we see, or measures or restrictions, because the risks of the repercussions that we can cause in our colleagues in our destinations can be very, very dangerous. I am also seeing a very good friend of mine, Benoit, from site in Florida. I'm not surprised to see your question. You're asking about if we have any data concerning the international Mexico and the Caribbean, with in particular to the incentives and the meeting industry. I don't know if Skift is developing any specifically for this market, or if any of your companies with Sojourn or Expedia. Derek, I know that you also have a lot of experience with the Caribbean. I don't know if any of you have anything that specifically answers to the Caribbean, Mexico incentives and meetings.
We at Skift, we're tracking Mexico as one of the 22 countries, but we don't focus particularly on the MySpace.
Yes, it's
okay.
Not
so
a market that we look into either. Sorry.
Unfortunately, then the answer is that we do not, but I think that maybe it could be interesting to start thinking about developing some stats for that particular market. Thank you regardless, Benoit, for the question. And that covers the last question of the day. And I believe that we've never been so good with time, because it's been 60 minutes exactly, and we are done through everything, the panel, the presentations, and the Q&As. If for any reason, any of you attending the panel have any unanswered questions, feel free to reach out to any of us directly through LinkedIn. All of us would be super happy to assist you. And I just would like to close by saying thank you to all of you, Katie, Derek, Wouter, Chinmay, for your time. It's a real pleasure to be with you. I must say that when I first reached out to you, and to your companies, you all were super happy to participate and to support each other. And that speaks highly of your companies and about you as professionals, because you are here to support the industry. And I am super glad that, yeah, we could share this time together. So thank you so much for joining. Thank you for all the attendees for joining us as well. And I hope to stay in touch soon.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.